Hello and welcome to the Bible Standard. Dive into an outstanding exploration of God's magnificent creation. This thought-provoking Bible study examines the ocean's powerful role, the silent witness of marine fossils and mountaintops, and the astonishing design seen in the salmon and the cuttlefish. Join us for an insightful and expositional journey through scripture and science that reveals the overwhelming evidence of divine intelligence and the global flood. Discover how the earth is filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and drop us a comment in the comment section to have your say. We love to hear from you.
The wonders of the ocean. We as Christadelphians, if I can make this work, we believe that God has created all things. And we also believe that all scripture is given by inspiration of God. And we refer to this often because there is no other authority above God. And so we look at his word as being inspired by him because we're told here that it is. And so when we consider things like creation and how creation came about, the creation account is in Genesis chapter 1. And we're just going to look at the first verse for the moment. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And if we were to go on in this chapter, we'd learn that God created everything. And there was an order to his creation. So everything on earth, everything that we see around us was created by God. In Psalm 104, which we had read, if we look back at verses 24 and 25, we read, O Lord, how manifold are thy works, in wisdom hast thou made them. All the earth is full of thy riches. So is this great and wide sea, wherein the things creeping, innumerable, both small and great beasts. And when we think about the ocean, we may think about many different aspects. Maybe we think of a day at the beach. Maybe we think of the powerful storms that come from the ocean. The beautiful coral reefs as we see pictured here. Or maybe we think of the great whales, or maybe powerful sharks. The Apostle Paul says in Romans that, and this is Romans chapter 1 and verse 20, for the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. And so if we were to just put this in simple English, what we're being told here is that God made all things, and his creation is proof to us of that. And if we really can't see that, there's no excuse for that. So we would say that his creation is a manifestation that he's done it, and it's a witness that there has to be something greater in God that created everything around us. So what do we know about the ocean? Just at a very, very high level. So first, wildlife. It's estimated that there's approximately 2 million species living in the world's ocean. At the current time, less than 250,000 of those species have actually been identified. So man really doesn't know everything that's in the ocean. It's just a guess, but they think they know roughly about 12% of what's actually in the ocean. So if we were to look at the surface area of the ocean, roughly 75% of the earth is covered by the ocean. And of this ocean area, roughly 80% of the ocean remains unexplored. And if we were to look at the U.S., roughly about 50% of the U.S. coastal waters are still unmapped. And I use that as an example because generally they tend to be much more into exploring than, let's say, some other countries. So given man's great thirst for knowledge, man wants to understand everything. Man seems to, want to have all the answers. We have a very limited knowledge of the ocean. And when we compare that to God's knowledge, and we often reference Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 12 to describe the grandeur and the magnitude and the magnificence of God. And Isaiah 40 verse 12 reads, who hath measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and meted out heaven with the span, and comprehended the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighted the mountains in scales, and the hills in a balance, And so we see this great picture of God holding all the water of the earth in the palm of his hand. Now, it's figurative language that's used here, but the point is that God can do anything. There's nothing that God cannot do. There's nothing that's too hard. There's nothing that God doesn't understand. And accepting that God created the earth can be a little bit of a problem for a lot of people, because nobody wants to feel inferior to anyone. Nobody wants to feel that they're accountable to a greater power. And so we see a large push in science to come up with a reason why God didn't create, or come up with some theory or hypothesis why God didn't create the heavens and the earth. And as we go through tonight, hopefully we'll all see that there is no other way but that God had to create the heavens and the earth. God had to create the ocean. So our evening is going to be broken into 3 small sections tonight. We're going to look at the role of the ocean. What does the ocean do on the earth? And we're not going to look at all the different things that it does. We're just going to look at a few. Then we're going to look at the ocean as a witness. Now, what do we mean by the ocean as a witness? Well, the ocean has left evidence that the Bible is in fact true. And we'll look at that. Then we're going to look at the grand designer. We look at some of these creatures and some of the things that we see around us, and they're amazing. And scientists can't even understand them with all the tools that they have. Okay, the role of the ocean. As we mentioned, over 70% of the Earth's surface is covered with water. There's 326 million trillion gallons. I put that on there for my son Jackson because he loves those big numbers. That's a lot of water. And we know that water is necessary for life. So when scientists want to go to space and they want to say go to Mars and find out, well, is there life on Mars? Was there ever life on Mars? What do they look for? They don't look for the life. They look for the water. And there's been no evidence that water has been found anywhere else except on Earth. I want to go back to Genesis chapter 1, and we're going to look at a few verses here. In Genesis chapter 1, and we're going to start at verse 9. And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear, and it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, and a herb yielding seed, and the fruit yielding, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good, and the evening and the morning were the third day. So we notice here that in this creation, this water was put here, and then life started, and it follows the pattern that we would expect it to follow. We also notice when we look at point 4 on the screen that more than half of the Earth's oxygen actually comes from the ocean. And we know that this is necessary for us to be able to breathe and for all plants and animals to actually be able to breathe. So when we look at the ocean, we have to understand some basic properties of water, because in fact, the ocean's biggest role on our planet is to make our planet livable. Not just so we have something to drink, but so that we actually can survive with the temperatures where we're living. So properties of water, well, it floats when it's frozen. Not many compounds do that. You know, if we think about what would happen if we changed those properties of water, all the ice would go to the bottom, the ice would just get thicker and thicker, all the plants would die, we would have no more oxygen, or not enough oxygen to sustain life. The other thing about water is it can contain a lot of heat energy, and it's really, really good at moving heat energy, and that's really the key for what the oceans do for the Earth. It's really good because it can transport heat energy by conduction, so that's just when heat moves through an object. It could be a solid object, it could be any object, but the heat is just moving through, but the matter, let's say, is staying stationary. It can transfer heat by convection, which, as we'll find out, that's generally what it does because the water is moving, and so the heat energy is moving along with the water. And it can, of course, the water cycle, it can transfer heat by evaporation. So how does the ocean store and distribute heat? Well, this is a map I got off the NOAA, or National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration website. So as you would expect, you see this orange area, it's kind of along the equator. So, and the heat travels both up and down, and there's currents where this heat is traveling, and it goes from warmer to colder until we get all the way up into the purple or pink, whichever one you'd like to prefer it. So it's distributing all this heat throughout the world. So now the description of what's happening in this map, we find it on this next page. So we're going to read this quickly. One way that the world's oceans affects weather and climate is by playing an important role in keeping our planet warm. The majority of radiation from the sun is absorbed by the ocean, particularly in tropical waters around the equator, where the ocean acts like a massive heat-retaining solar panel. I'll move that pointer off for you. Land areas also absorb some sunlight, and the atmosphere helps to retain heat that would otherwise quickly radiate into space after sunset. The ocean doesn't just store solar radiation, it helps to distribute heat around the globe when water molecules are heated. They exchange freely with the air in a process called evaporation. Ocean water is constantly evaporating, increasing the temperature and humidity of the surrounding air to form rain and storms that are then carried by trade winds. In fact, almost all rains that falls on land starts off in the ocean. The tropics are particularly rainy because heat absorption and thus ocean evaporation is highest in these areas. Outside of Earth's equatorial areas, weather patterns are driven by large ocean currents. Currents are movements of ocean water in a continuous flow created largely by surface winds, but also partly by temperature and salinity gradients. Earth's rotation and tides. Major current systems typically flow clockwise in the northern hemisphere and counterclockwise in the southern hemisphere in circular patterns that often trace the coastlines. Ocean currents act like a conveyor belt, and in my opinion, this is the important part, transporting warm water and precipitation from the equator toward the poles and cold water from the poles back to the tropics. Thus, ocean currents can regulate global climate, helping to counteract uneven distribution of solar and frigid toward the solar hot at the equator, and frigid toward the poles, and less of Earth's land would be habitable. Well, okay, so I think we can safely say that without the oceans, the climate would be a lot different. So this speaks directly to why God created the earth. God created the earth to be inhabited, and we're told that. So Isaiah 45:18 reads, "For thus saith the Lord that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it, he hath established it. He created it not in vain. He formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord, and there is none else." So in order for the earth to actually sustain life and to be inhabited, these oceans are necessary. And we find that these oceans are there in just the right amounts to actually make life habitable. So who's heard of El Nino? I guess you don't need to raise your hands, but probably all of us have heard of El Nino. Tim's raising his hand. So probably we all have. And I mean, we all hear El Nino and we all kind of think it's a bad thing, and yeah, it kind of is, but what is it? So this is from the same website. They had a lot of really good information on this website, so hopefully you don't grow up bored of it. This is actually our last slide from this website, I promise. So El Nino, and we won't read this whole thing, but really what it is El Nino it's a change in ocean temperature. And if we come down here, it's a change in the Pacific Ocean near the equator. And it's only a 0.5 degrees Celsius change. And with that small little change in the ocean temperature, you get these severe weather patterns. Could be tropical storms and hurricanes. They reference mudslides in California. But the point is that that small little change is massive. It has a huge effect on the world's weather patterns. And we look at it and we say, like, we live in this planet that has this perfect balance that's able to sustain life across the majority of this planet. And we have this sun that's a certain distance from this ocean that heats this planet up just right. And when things get out of balance, it creates havoc. And so we see the design that's there, we see the balance that's there, and we see the intelligence that went into creating this balance so that it could all work together. If we ever actually take the time to figure out how many things have to work together for that, like it's staggering. You know, the sun, gravity, the moon, the winds, all the systems, all the planets would have to align perfectly in order for life to happen here. And our God did that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the ocean as a witness. And I never really realized how big or how much evidence there is of really the flood, which is in Genesis. But when we look for evidence that the flood took place, we can see all kinds of evidence that there's marine mammals in places you would just never expect, or animals, I should say, or the remains of them. You would just never expect it unless there was a flood. They just couldn't possibly get there. So this picture that we're looking at here, this is a place called Cerro Ballena, and it's in Chile. Now, this place is about 130 feet above sea level. And in this area, there's about 40 skeletons found. And these are whale skeletons. And we wouldn't expect to find these there. Well, we're going to read this. This is off of Wikipedia. Cerro Ballena, meaning whale hill, is a fossiliferous locality of the Bahia Iglesia Formation, located in the Atacama Desert along the Pan-American Highway, a few kilometers north of the port of Caldera, Chile. It has been dated back to the late Miocene epoch. During the Neogene epoch, the locality was first noted in 1965 during military work and fully excavated and studied between 2011 and 2012, and is protected by law since the latter year. So Cerro Ballena is extremely abundant in cetacean fossil skeletons, including over 40 individuals of adult and juvenile ages. So that's marine mammals is what that means. This high concentration of cetacean skeletons has made Cerro Ballena well known, now considered a national treasure of Chile. Besides cetaceans, the site does also consist of fossils of pinnipeds, which are seals, sailfish, sharks, and swordfish, aquatic sloths, and invertebrate trace fossils. Now, this is a massive amount of sea life, or the decaying matter, the fossilized remains of sea life that we see here. And when we look in other places, we see evidence like this. Whale fossils in Chile have been found at varying elevations, including high in the Andes Mountains at elevations over 5,000 feet in the Atacama Desert. So the Cerro Ballena, it's not the only place where marine life has been found. It's been found all over. This article was from 2015, and this was in California. See, paleontologists made an unexpected discovery in a very unexpected location when they unearthed a nearly intact whale skeleton well above sea level. So this particular one is from Vermont, and this was found in 1849, and it's found at about 200 feet above sea level. This is a beluga whale, and they call it Charlotte. It was found in Charlotte, Vermont, and this is 150 miles from the nearest coast. It was found by a group of railroad workers. So there is no disputing, and that's the point of this article. It is beyond dispute among geologists that on every continent we find fossils of sea creatures in rock layers, which today are high above sea level. For example, we find marine fossils in most of the rock layers in Grand Canyon. This includes the topmost layer in the sequence, the Kaibab limestone exposed at the rim of the canyon, which today is approximately 7,000 to 8,000 feet above sea level. Those at the top of the sequence, this limestone must have been deposited beneath ocean waters loaded with lime sediment and swept over northern Arizona and beyond. Other rock layers exposed in Grand Canyon also contain large numbers of marine fossils. That keeps getting stuck there. I apologize for that. Other rock layers exposed in Grand Canyon also contain large numbers of marine fossils. The best example is Redwall limestone, which commonly contains fossil brachiopods, a clam-like organism, corals, bizoans, lace corals, crinoids, sea lilies, bivalves, which are types of clams, gastropods, marine snails, trilobites, cephalopods, and even fish teeth. So we read here that these things are found on every continent. And they're not found just a little bit on every continent. They're found all over on every continent. This article is about the Himalayas, the tallest mountains in the world. And there are fossils all over these mountains, including Mount Everest. Marine fossils are also found high in the Himalayas, the world's tallest mountain range, reaching up to 29,029 feet above sea level. For example, fossil ammonites, coiled marine cephalopods, are found in limestone beds in the Himalayas of Nepal. All geologists agree that ocean waters must have buried these marine fossils in these limestone beds. Now, what scientists will often tell you is that, well, those must have been at the bottom of the ocean and they came up. And it took a long time for them to come up. But that can't really answer the question. How can that work? Because it's everywhere. It's not just in the mountains. It's in the deserts. It's on the plateaus. It's in the valleys. It's everywhere. You can find these all over. We know the account of Noah's Ark very well. We're just going to read a few verses from it. And every living substance was destroyed, which was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle, and the creeping things, and the fowl of the heaven. And they were destroyed from the earth, and Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. And the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. And now to chapter 8 and verse 4. And the ark rested in the 7th month, and the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. And the waters decreased continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day, were the tops of the mountains seen. So we're very clearly told that the water was above the mountains. And unless there was a flood, it can't be that we find these fossils all over the earth. It can't be that the entire earth, unless it was underwater from the flood, just rose up from the water. So the idea that, anywhere these things pop up, because they're too frequent, it just doesn't work unless everything came out of the water, because the water went down, which is what the scriptures tell us. The next thing we're going to look at is some of the creatures that God's designed. We're just going to look at two of them. We're going to look at salmon, and we're going to look at cuttlefish. Now, salmon are andromynous, which really just means they spawn in the fresh water, and then they swim out to the ocean. They spend their adult lives in the ocean, and then they swim back to where they began their lives to spawn. And they're not the only type of fish that does this. Striped bass and sea lamprey spawn in freshwater and mature in saltwater. And then there's catadrominous fish, which are basically the opposite, where they spawn in the sea and then they go into fresh water. So the salmon maturing in the ocean and then swimming back or coming from the fresh water, the streams, and swimming into the ocean, they go through this process. And it's called osmoregulation, as you see at the bottom here. And this next slide will show us kind of how that works. Really, I'm just going to quickly describe how it works without reading this, but basically they have these, I'll call it a valve. So they have this valve that is, or this, it's a pump, and they pump salt water or salt out when they go into the ocean. But when they're in fresh water, it works in the opposite direction. They pump the salt in. And there's various other changes within the salmon that allow the salmon to do this. So what's interesting really about the salmon is not that it can do this, but it's how it does this. So they have this special ability, but why do they do it? And why do they do it in the way that they do? So we know it's instinctive, but it's also necessary. And it's necessary for the salmon to move into the rivers, for example, because a newly born salmon, or it's not even called a fry, it's called something else, an alvin is what it's called, when it's still attached to the egg, but it can't actually survive in the salt water. It'll die in salt water. So, but when we ask ourselves, how does the salmon know that? How does the salmon know that its spawn can't actually survive in the salt water? And I think it's a simple answer if you believe in creation, but how did it know? And once the salmon enters the stream, the adult salmon, to spawn, the salmon starts to die. And it's not dying because it can't breathe or it can't handle the fresh water. That's not the reason it's dying at all. It's dying because it stops eating. At this point, all of the salmon's effort is to swim up that stream and to reproduce. And after it does, that dead salmon fertilizes the streams and leaves a rich environment where plants grow, insects are born, and that's what their young feed on in the spring. But why would they ever choose that? Why would the salmon ever choose to swim up that stream to die? How would they know? Like when we start asking the questions about why they are this way, we can see the logic in it if we understand all the things that happen in the process. How does a fish get there? The fish didn't get there on its own. God put the instincts there. We see the intelligence in the way that they work, but the fish didn't figure it out. And to think that the fish figured it out on their own, how would they ever? They'd spawn in the sea. How would they know to get to the sea? All these things can't be coincidence, is the point. The next thing we're going to look at is cuttlefish. Cuttlefish are cephalopods, which are related to octopus and squid. They're known as the chameleon of the sea, but they're way cooler than chameleons. They can do a lot more than just change their colors. So they have these skin cells called chromatophores in the top layer of their skin, and it allows them to change the appearance. This particular picture, I took it from a video, or these two pictures, and this is literally seconds apart. You see the cuttlefish moved kind of from here to a little bit over here, and just as soon as it was there, it changed its appearance. Now, they have more kinds of cells, but with the chromatophores in their skin, you see this cuttlefish here, he's able to make these wave-like patterns. And when you actually watch it, and I couldn't put a video on here, but when you actually watch these wave-like patterns, that cuttlefish could be still, and he looks like he's moving. And he could be moving forward and have these waves moving backwards. And you could never tell, watching that video, which way that cuttlefish is actually moving. And so they use this to confuse the prey animals that would prey upon them, so that it helps to keep them safe. Now, this picture on the bottom right, this is a flamboyant cuttlefish. It's at the same type as the one on top, but this one is red, and he's turned red in order to warn off a predator. And he is poisonous. He carries a poison that's 1,000 times more deadly than cyanide. So that's a little bit about them, but some of the other things that they can do with their skin is actually a whole lot more cool than what we've seen so far. So beneath these chromatophores, which is the top layer, there's layers of leucophores and iridophores. And these cells, they act as reflectors, and they produce iridescent reflections, such as you see on the right. And you can kind of make out on the back some of these, they look almost like glowing lights. Now, this cuttlefish, and this is the same cuttlefish, and it's literally, I don't know, maybe a half a second apart, maybe a second. And it's a little bit difficult to make out here, but you can kind of see here along this line, this black line. So he's about to eat a crab. And then you can see down here this, the black has kind of moved down, and literally that line just keeps going like this and coming back and going like this. And so he's literally looking right at a crab right now. And that crab just sits there like this. Like it's just mesmerized the crab, right? And a little sucker thing comes out and he eats them. So, and we see like, we think about what it takes to make like all these different types of skin cells and then like how'd that cuttlefish ever learn to use all these different types of skin cells, right? Like, you know, like maybe I should make myself known so my prey doesn't escape kind of thing, right? Like it's not logical. But yet God's put this cuttlefish together in such a way that it's amazing. And, you know, even as scientists study these cuttlefish, there's not a lot that they know about them, but, you know, that cuttlefish is colorblind. It can't even see what color it is. But yet it's matched the color of its surroundings. So it can't look at itself and say, hey, that's what I look like. So all these skin connections are hardwired right into the motor center of their brain. So it's like that. They don't have to think about it. They just do it. So they do not visually confirm what color they've turned. They're able to do that from birth. They're hatched from an egg, and they're born with the ability to do all this. Not only are they able to do that with their food and obviously to be able to hide, but when they are, let's say, changed to the color of the sandy bottom, they're able to communicate with one another with these iridophores by changing the polarization of the light, and only the cuttlefish can see. And I want to think about that. So what would bring a creature like this cuttlefish to have this ability to iridesce its body, to have this wave-like movement, which just totally makes the crab stand still? Like, what would lead to it? The simple answer is really, really, really high intelligence. It isn't chance. Like, I mean, chance, you know, the logical thinking in us, chance would do the opposite. You know, you make that cuttlefish be able to travel like a missile. But that's not what happened. He just moseys on over. He iridesces. He's got this funky wave going down his head, and he sticks his sucker out and he gets that crab. And it's amazing when we start to look at the way God has created this creature. And there's tons of creatures we could look at. The way he's created us. So we've looked at a few things tonight. We've looked at the role of the ocean. We've looked at a witness that is left in the most unlikely of places of these marine fossils. And we can't explain it when we take away the flood. We've looked at two ocean examples, the life of salmon and cuttlefish, and we see the intelligence in everything that we've looked at. We see the evidence of the flood. We read earlier that God created the earth to be inhabited. God also created the earth to be filled with his glory. Habakkuk 2:14, for the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the Lord, knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. And when this definitely speaks to us of a future day, but we also pick up that simile in there. The knowledge of the glory of God as the waters cover the sea. And for sure it means completely, but do we see the glory of God in the ocean? Do we see the glory of God and his manifestation of his glory in all the things that he's created? I'm going to close with what we have on the screen. Psalm 107, 23 and 24. They that go down to the sea in ships that do business in great waters, these see the works of the Lord and his wonders in the deep. Do we see the wonders, brothers and sisters? Do we see the wonders, young people and interested friends? Or are we, as the apostle said in Romans chapter 1 and verse 20, are we without excuse? We need to see the wonders. Thank you.
Don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a comment in the comment section and let us know what you thought. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Please share it and spread the word. Thanks for watching, and remember to come back soon.